If you're watching this, chances are you've been running on empty for a while. You've tried the morning routines, the productivity hacks, the rise and grind mentality, and somewhere along the way, you started believing that being constantly busy was the same as being successful. But here's what neuroscience tells us. Hustle culture isn't just ineffective, it's literally rewiring your brain for burnout. And today, I'm going to show you a completely different path. I'm going to share the real science behind sustainable self-improvement. Not the version that leaves you exhausted and guilty, but the kind that actually works with your brain instead of against it. So if you're tired of feeling like you're failing at being productive, if you're sick of that cycle of motivation and crash, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share could change everything. The first thing you need to understand is this. Your brain wasn't designed for constant hustle. When you're chronically stressed, your brain releases cortisol, a hormone that's supposed to help you survive immediate threats. But when cortisol levels stay elevated for months or years, it literally shrinks your prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for decision-making, focus, and emotional regulation. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology found that people working more than 55 hours per week showed a 33% increased risk of stroke and a 13% increased risk of coronary heart disease. But here's the kicker, their actual productivity decreased after 50 hours per week. They were literally damaging their health while getting less done. This isn't just happening to a few people. According to the American Psychological Association, 84% of American workers now report feeling emotionally drained from work, and 76% say workplace stress affects their personal relationships. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain has two systems that drive behavior, the wanting system and the liking system. Hustle culture hijacks your wanting system, flooding it with dopamine every time you check off a task or hit a deadline. But your liking system, the part that actually creates satisfaction and fulfillment, gets completely ignored. That's why you can work 12-hour days and still feel empty. You're training your brain to want more productivity while never actually enjoying the process or the results. Dr. Anna Lemke from Stanford University explains this perfectly in her research on dopamine dysregulation. She says, when we constantly spike our dopamine through high-intensity activities, we create a deficit state where normal activities feel boring or meaningless. So what's the alternative? How do you actually improve yourself without burning out? The answer lies in understanding how your brain naturally wants to change. And it's not through force or willpower, it's through something called neuroplasticity, but applied in a completely different way than you've been told. Here's the key insight. Your brain changes most effectively through small, consistent actions that feel almost effortless. Not because you're being lazy, but because your brain's neural pathways strengthen through repetition, not intensity. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you want to start exercising. Hustle culture would tell you to commit to an hour at the gym every day. But neuroscience shows us that starting with just 2 minutes of movement, literally just 2 minutes, creates a neural pathway that's much more likely to stick. Why? Because your brain doesn't resist small changes. It only fights against actions that feel threatening or overwhelming. When you try to force massive changes, your amygdala, your brain's alarm system, kicks in and sabotages your efforts. But when you start with tiny actions, you're working with your brain's natural learning process. You're building what researchers call implementation intentions, automatic mental links between situations and behaviors. Dr. B.J. Fogg at Stanford's Behavior Design Lab has researched this extensively. He found that the most successful behavior changes happen when three elements align: motivation, ability, and trigger. But here's the surprising part. Ability is more important than motivation. In other words, making something easier to do is more powerful than trying to get more motivated to do it. Let me show you how this works in practice. Instead of trying to wake up at 5 a.m. for a morning routine, you might simply put your workout clothes next to your bed. Instead of committing to read for an hour, you might just open a book to page 1. These aren't your end goals, they're your starting points. And they work because they honor how your brain actually functions. Now, let's talk about sleep. because this is where most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. Your brain has a natural circadian rhythm controlled by a cluster of neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This internal clock regulates when you feel alert and when you feel sleepy. But here's what's crucial. When you disrupt this rhythm through inconsistent sleep, late night screen time, or caffeine too late in the day, you're not just feeling tired, you're literally impairing your brain's ability to form new habits and make good decisions. A study from the University of California, Berkeley, found that just one night of poor sleep reduces the brain's ability to form new memories by 40. And chronic sleep deprivation? It makes you 50 more likely to make impulsive decisions and 30 more likely to give up on your goals. So if you're trying to improve your life while running on 5 hours of sleep, you're essentially fighting your own biology. The solution isn't to force yourself to sleep more, it's to create conditions that make good sleep inevitable. This means setting a consistent bedtime, dimming lights 2 hours before sleep, and keeping your bedroom cool. But here's the thing that most sleep advice misses. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent enough that your brain starts to expect and prepare for good sleep. Let's talk about nutrition, because this is another area where hustle culture has created complete chaos. You've probably been told to completely overhaul your diet, count every calorie, and eliminate entire food groups. But neuroscience shows us that dietary changes stick best when they're integrated into your existing habits, not when they replace them entirely. Your brain runs on glucose, and when blood sugar levels spike and crash throughout the day, your decision-making ability goes with them. A study from the University of Cambridge found that judges were 65 more likely to grant parole right after lunch when their blood sugar was stable, compared to right before lunch when it was low. This isn't about willpower, it's about brain chemistry. When your blood sugar crashes, your prefrontal cortex literally has less energy to make good decisions. The solution? Focus on protein and fiber with each meal to stabilize blood sugar and eat at consistent times to support your circadian rhythm. You don't need to ban sugar or become a perfect eater. You just need to give your brain steady fuel. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the guilt and shame that comes with this approach. You've probably been conditioned to believe that if something isn't hard, it doesn't count. That struggle equals virtue and ease equals laziness. But this is just a cultural myth, not a biological truth. Your brain doesn't care about your cultural conditioning. It cares about efficient learning and sustainable change. Dr. Self-compassion researcher Kristen Neff has found that self-compassion is actually more effective than self-criticism for motivating change. When you're kind to yourself about setbacks, you're more likely to get back on track quickly instead of spiraling into shame. This doesn't mean being soft or making excuses. It means treating yourself like you would treat a good friend who was struggling, with patience, understanding, and practical support. Here's what this looks like in practice. When you miss a workout, instead of telling yourself you're lazy, you might say, "I'm human," and humans sometimes struggle with consistency. What would make tomorrow's workout more likely to happen? This isn't just feel-good psychology, it's practical neuroscience. Self-criticism activates your brain's threat detection system, while self-compassion activates your brain's caregiving system, which is much better at problem-solving and learning. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. I work with someone who had been trying to build a morning routine for 3 years. Every Monday, she'd commit to waking up at 5:30 a.m. for yoga and journaling. By Wednesday, she'd hit snooze and feel like a failure. Instead of trying harder, we tried easier. She committed to just sitting up in bed for 30 seconds when her alarm went off. That's it. Not getting up, not doing yoga, just sitting up. It sounds almost ridiculous, but within 2 weeks, she was naturally getting up earlier because sitting up made staying in bed feel less comfortable. The habit built itself from there. This is the power of working with your brain instead of against it. You're not looking for dramatic transformations, you're looking for sustainable momentum. Now, let's talk about the social pressure aspect, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. You might be thinking, this sounds great, but my boss expects me to hustle. My friends will think I'm lazy if I'm not constantly busy. Here's the truth. People who practice sustainable self-improvement actually become more reliable and effective, not less. When you're not constantly burned out, you can show up more consistently. When you're not running on stress hormones, you make better decisions. A study from the Harvard Business Review found that employees who took regular breaks and maintained work-life boundaries were 23 more likely to receive promotions and 31 more likely to be rated as high performers by their 46,000 managers. But more importantly, you can't live your life based on other people's misconceptions about productivity. You have to decide, do you want to look busy or do you want to be effective? Here's your practical starting point. Tonight, before you go to bed, choose one tiny action you can take tomorrow that moves you toward who you want to become. Not a massive change, something so small it feels almost silly. Maybe it's drinking one extra glass of water. Maybe it's taking 3 deep breaths before checking your phone. Maybe it's writing down one thing you're grateful for. The key is that it has to feel easy enough that you can't talk yourself out of it. If you feel resistance, make it smaller. Then do that one thing for 1 week. Not because it's going to transform your life by itself, but because it's going to prove to your brain that change is possible without suffering. Once that feels automatic, and it will, you can add another small action. Then another. Before you know it, you'll have built a completely different relationship with growth and change. Remember, you're not trying to become a different person overnight. You're trying to become the person you already are when you're at your best, more consistently. The version of you that exists when you're well-rested, nourished, and not running on stress hormones that's not an accident. That's your brain functioning optimally. And with the right approach, that can become your default state instead of your exception. Your brain is not broken. Hustle culture is broken. Your instinct to want ease and sustainability isn't laziness, it's wisdom. It's your brain trying to protect you from a system that was never designed for your well-being. So here's my challenge for you. What's one hustle habit you're ready to release? What's one small, sustainable action you can take instead? Share it in the comments below, because when we normalize sustainable change, we make it easier for everyone to choose health over hustle. The research I've shared today comes from peer-reviewed studies in occupational health psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral psychology. You'll find links to all these studies in the description below if you want to dive deeper into the science. Thank you for choosing to invest in yourself in a way that actually works. Your future self will thank you for it.